experience, and type any comments or questions you have into the chat box where my co-host Megan Shreve will be answering requests. Again, my name is Caroline Johnson, your host and facilitator for today's event. I'll now turn it over to the President and CEO of the Adams County Community Foundation, Ralph Serpy.
Thank you, Caroline. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ralph Serpy with the Adams County Community Foundation. 3 years ago, the founding members of the Adams County Affordable Housing Coalition, SCAP, Healthy Adams County, PICPI, the United Way, and the Community Foundation decided to plunge full steam ahead with a community-wide initiative built around affordable living. We're looking at housing, regional transportation, and economic development. With support from the Community Foundation through the Forward Fund, At Home in Adams County has progressed further than I think we could have imagined. Thanks to the good work of SCAP, which houses At Home in Adams County, and our friends at the Adams Economic Alliance and scores of other partners. This past year has proved why community-wide broadband access is important, and kicking the can down the road is no longer an option. It's 2021, folks. It's time to think of broadband as a utility, like water, like electricity. So today, we're asking you all to help us overcome the obstacles and help us find solutions to affordable, community-wide broadband access in Adams County. Today's virtual seminar is our next step in helping us get there. Today, we're happy that kicking us off today is Sherry Collins, Senior Director with the Pennsylvania Department of Community and Economic Development and DCED's Broadband Guru. So good morning, and please join me in welcoming Sherry Collins.
Good morning, Ralph. Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity to be on today. I'm keeping my fingers crossed that everybody's connection remains stable, and more importantly, that my 2 Labrador retrievers don't start barking like crazy women in the background here. So I'll apologize in advance if they do. So again, I want to thank you very, very much. It's truly an honor to be here with you today. On behalf of DCED Secretary Dennis Davin, I thank you for inviting the department to kick off this event. Secretary Davin sends his regards and well wishes for a successful summit. The Secretary is actively getting ready for the department's hearing before the House Appropriations Committee, which starts at 1 o'clock. So Ralph and Caroline, thank you both for recognizing the need for the last minute change and for allowing us to pivot on today's event. Your understanding and support is very much appreciated. I do want to congratulate you on what I know will be a very successful virtual summit. Your list of speakers is extraordinary, and I look forward to watching until I have to leave for the Secretary's hearing. The topic of broadband infrastructure and access to affordable, reliable, high-speed internet is top of mind, not only for myself and Secretary Davin, but for the governor as well. Getting Pennsylvania connected has been and continues to be a top priority for the Wolf administration. At various levels of the administration, we have traveled across Pennsylvania, spending time with and listening to our community leaders, our parents, our students, our educators, and our businesses to better understand the challenges they face by not having access to high-speed internet. We have read the various reports, we've listened to the experts, and have heard stories from every corner of the Commonwealth about the need for broadband. If there is one thing that we can all agree on, that is that access to high-speed internet is critical for our future, our children's future, and the future of Pennsylvania's economy. And while we have a long way to go, we have absolutely witnessed some successes, including the work that is being done by Tri-County Rural Electric, as well as the enactment of Act 132 of 2020, which provides funding for the advancement of high-speed broadband services infrastructure deployment. Boy, that's a mouthful, in unserved areas of this Commonwealth. This funding will be made available by the Commonwealth Financing Authority, pardon me, and it is anticipated that it will be available later this year. Please check DCD's webpage for updates on program guidelines and how communities such as Adams County can get access to that funding. Again, I want to thank you very much for allowing me to be part of today's session. This is truly a huge and very important topic, and the department stands ready to support you in your efforts. Carolyn and Ralph, I'll put my contact information in the chat box, and I do encourage everybody to reach out to me if you want to learn more about the work that the department continues to do. Again, I want to thank you very much for having me on this morning. I look forward to hearing the rest of the presentation later this afternoon, and want to also congratulate Dr. Kopko on his efforts. I know that he and the team at the Center for Rural Pennsylvania have been doing a tremendous amount of work on this topic as well. So Kyle, congratulations. And of course, we continue to look forward to working with you as well. So thank you.
Awesome. Sherry, thank you so much for welcoming us today. That's a lot of great information. We'll then turn it over to Dr. Kopko, our first keynote speaker, who is the director of the Center for Rural Pennsylvania. Today, he will discuss with us critical data to inform us about the importance of broadband in small and rural communities in Pennsylvania. So Dr. Kopko, take it away.
All right, can everyone hear me? Yes, I see some heads nodding. Very good. I'm going to screen share here a PowerPoint presentation. And I also see right off the bat a question from David L. So I thought I'd give a quick explanation on that question. So what do we mean when we talk about broadband? So it's a great question before we even get started here. And it varies depending on who you're talking with. So let's just start with the FCC definition, if we could, really quickly. So the FCC has updated their definition of broadband periodically over the years, and right now it's 25.3. So 25 megabits per second download speed, 3 megabits per second upload speed. And that's the so-called Netflix speed. So you could, stream video services, have a Zoom chat, things of that nature. Pennsylvania has had a couple of different definitions. So this past legislative cycle, updating what is meant by high-speed broadband access, which is along the lines of the FCC definition, but also the PUC has a broadband bill of rights that guarantees at least 1.5 megabits per second download speed. But that definition hasn't really been updated, I think, since 2005, if memory serves me correctly. But that is the minimum that any consumer in the Commonwealth is guaranteed to have upon request. But for the most part, the 25.3 that the FCC uses is what most folks, I think, are thinking about whenever we're discussing broadband here. So that out of the way, I'll just do a brief introduction on the Center for Rural Pennsylvania. And I just want to say at the outset that please feel free to reach out to us if there's anything that we can do to be of assistance. The Center for Rural Pennsylvania is a legislative agency of the Pennsylvania General Assembly. So we are an office within the legislature itself. We were created back in the 1980s at a time when there was increasing economic depression in rural communities, and the legislature just didn't have good actionable data on conditions in rural counties, rural municipalities. And so we were given two mandates when we were initially created. One is to create a comprehensive statistical database tracking all different types of indicators that can be used in the policy-making process, and also to administer grants to faculty members at our state universities to conduct applied policy research analysis. And in addition to that, we also hold a variety of hearings on various types of pressing topics for our rural communities. And our most recent hearing was actually last week on the topic of broadband, highlighting the good work by Tri-County Electric Co-op in the Northern Tier, as Sherry Collins just alluded to moments ago. And that's also on our website. So if you Google the Center for Rural Pennsylvania, you'll come to our website and we have a press release there and also a link to the video and submitted testimony as well. So that's all there for your reference. So what do we mean by rural Pennsylvania? I just want to start off there before we get into some specific information about Adams County and broadband access here. So we define rural Pennsylvania as basically on a population density basis. So 284 persons or less per square mile. So that means approximately 3.4 million people in Pennsylvania live in rural communities. That's about 75% of the landmass in the entire state. So you can see the green shaded counties here. Those are the ones that are going to be rural classifications. The light yellow ones here are urban classifications. We also classify municipalities and school districts. So if you have a need for data on this, it's all posted on our website. You can download this information by county, by municipality, and school district, and also get a variety of statistical indicators by community as well. And this just provides a further breakdown of the population density. So you can see that Adams County falls into our classification as a rural area. As of the last census, 197.3 population density per square mile. And that's probably going to change just a little bit whenever we get the updated version of the census data sometime after this summer. So back to my earlier comment about the center producing research in cooperation with faculty members at state universities. I want to highlight two studies that we've conducted on broadband access in rural communities. And these were conducted by Professor Sasha Meinrath and some of his other colleagues at the X Lab at Penn State and also at other nonprofits throughout the country. So the first report came out in 2018. So this is a little bit out of date now, but we have data on every single county in the Commonwealth. And at the time, what its broadband speeds were calculated to be. And the reason why I bring this up is because there's actually an information gap. And this is something that we think is important to highlight for community planners and those engaged in economic development. The FCC maintains a variety of maps throughout the country stating what the average download speeds are for a particular area, or upload speeds as well. But the problem with their measurement tactic, as noted in this report, is they break it down to the census block, and they assume that as long as one person or one entity within that census block has internet speeds that meet the FCC definition of 25.3, they assume that everyone in the census block has it. So it has a pretty low threshold to give credit for an entire census block. So at the time that the data was collected in December of 2017, it said that all of Adams County had high-speed internet. Obviously, we know that's not true. And they also provided additional information about the types of internet connectivity. Is it fiber? Is it satellite? Is it cable, DSL? Is it wireless? Again, all this is on our website. You can feel free to go check it out and also contact me if you have any trouble accessing this information. But at the time, the average download speed based upon speed tests conducted by the M Lab, this is different than what the FCC reported, was just 5.4 megabits per second. So that's pretty slow. It would be very, very difficult to stream anything on Netflix, engage in Zoom conversation like we're having now. It would be exceptionally hard for children to get online for virtual schooling or anything of the sort. So again, this was as of data collected in 2017. The report was published in 2018. Now, if we look at where we stand today, based upon M-Lab measurement tests, things have improved for Adams County a good bit. Now, that's not to say that work still doesn't need to be done. There is still a fair amount of work that needs to be undertaken to improve accessibility throughout the county. So now the download speed is up to 39 megabits per second. The average upload is about 5.7, and it's ranked number 20 out of the 67 counties in the Commonwealth in terms of internet speed downloads. And just to put this in a greater context, who's the fastest county based upon these data? Chester County. So they have greater capacity for fiber in that county, and also closer to Philadelphia. So 81 megabits as a download speed, and the average upload is about 20. The kind of midpoint then is Erie County up in the northwest part of the state. So you can see how that compares to Adams County. And then Snyder County for the first half of 2020 had pretty slow connectivity speeds here, which probably reflects a high number of folks who are using dial-up or DSL, or just have outdated technology and infrastructure in place to just to provide that additional connectivity. And a second report that Professor Meinrath released through our grant-funded program underscores the differences in connectivity between rural and urban areas, showing that here the urban areas are the gold bars, the rural areas are the blue bars. Dial-up, DSL, much more common in rural areas. They just don't have the connectivity speeds. It's information that we would expect, but this at least helped to provide concrete information to show how prevalent these slower speeds are in rural areas. And just to provide a larger context for the state as a whole, before we get into specific information about Adams County, the white colored counties here show internet access that is below the state average. And Adams County falls into that category ever so slightly. But the blue counties have greater levels of connectivity per household, as indicated in the American Community Survey. And we also break down some indicators here to provide some differences between those households that have internet and those that don't. Those that don't tend to be older, they tend to have lower income. They're more representative within the poverty level. So again, lower income. Also, I find this to be disturbing. A large percentage of them, 40%, have some sort of disability as well. 27% are employed versus 64% of households with internet access. So there's a pretty large gap there, which also suggests the ability to afford internet access, not just merely having access to the infrastructure. All right. So let's talk about Adams County now, since that's why we're all here. And obviously there's a lot of indicators that suggest that broadband is needed beyond what was already said here. There are 103 high technology businesses, according to the American Community Survey and data from the Census Bureau. At least 12% of the adults are employed in STEM fields. 7% of adults have a STEM degree. You have 2 institutions of higher education, large employers, hospitals, 2 public library systems, and at least this is all before the pandemic, mind you, nearly 3,000 residents worked at home before the pandemic. So all indicators of why broadband is needed in Adams County. We won't get the updated data for 2000 in the pandemic period, probably till another year from now. Here, we're able to break down who does have the technology needed to access the internet. And 1 in 10 households in the greater Adams County area do not have a computer device at all. I'll let that sink in for just a second. And this is as of 2019. And I do want to just throw out a brief word of caution here. This isn't just solely Adams County data here. We had to include Washington Township and Waynesboro Borough and Franklin County. You can see this up here for our map of Pennsylvania. The green census block groups show areas in which there are households that there are at least 20% of households in that census block that don't have any internet access at all. So you see that more prevalently in north central Adams County and also the western part of the county there too. So I'll just zoom on back out here. We have about 74% of residents in the county that have multiple computer devices. 1% only have a tablet. 9% have a smartphone only. 6% have either a laptop or desktop, and then 10% just don't have a computer at all. And for those that don't have a computer in the greater Adams County area, you can see, again, they tend to be older, lower household income. They tend not to have children They tend to be living alone, and about 36% are renters as opposed to home owners. And I will provide these slides also to Caroline in advance, so that way folks can access these at a later time. And how are folks accessing the internet in Adams County? Well, many at least have cellular phone plans that allow them to access this on their mobile devices. But again, that doesn't provide the connectivity that you would need for a Zoom meeting or probably doing anything work related. About 83% have some form of broadband defined here as DSL cable or fiber. Again, DSL, though, probably doesn't meet that 25.3 threshold for the FCC. And that's just 1 percentage point lower than the state average based upon the American Community Survey. About 9% get it through satellite services. About 2% use free Wi-Fi, either through libraries, schools, coffee shops, things of that nature. And another 3% still access the internet through dial-up. About 20% of households only have one method of internet access, whereas the majority can get it multiple ways, either through their phone or through a regular connection of some sort. And speaking of cell phones, just to put this in greater context, because 5G is going to be coming to communities, which should theoretically allow for faster speeds and allow for the type of connectivity that would allow a Zoom conversation to take place. If we look at the United States here, as of 2020, about 63% of households are wireless only. They don't have a landline. And these bar charts here provide differences between 2016 and 2019 for the United States, Pennsylvania, and Adams County. So a greater percentage now of folks in Adams County, 81% don't have a landline at all. They have a cell phone of some sort that would provide them with some connectivity. But even so, look at the differences between those that do and do not have a smartphone capable of getting internet access. Again, tend to be older, lower medium household income, not as likely to be employed. So these are going to be folks who are usually senior citizens or unemployed. So just something to keep in mind when we're discussing this particular demographic of resident. And before I wrap up here, I just wanted to provide some details on some recent legislative actions that Sherry Collins mentioned a little bit earlier too. And these are not going to be the only legislative actions that you hear of to help promote broadband build out in the near future. So Act 98 was instrumental in helping to lift some barriers for electric co-ops to get involved in providing broadband access. So many of you might be familiar with the electric co-op model. These are the entities that were established during the Great Depression to help provide electricity in rural areas. Between 5 and 10% of rural areas in the United States at the time had electricity, so a very small percentage, and that helped to electrify rural America. And now a lot of co-ops see broadband access as being the next logical step for their services. Because they have the power lines, the poles, the easements, that sort of thing. So it makes deployment a bit easier. And since they are member owned, the membership gets to help have a say in how the broadband is actually deployed. Also, Act 132 provided at least $5 million in funding through the Commonwealth Financing Authority. I would expect to see the legislature take more action on that in the future, particularly if the federal government provides additional stimulus dollars to the states, where this would be provided as grants to communities throughout the Commonwealth to help build broadband infrastructure. And I think too, something else to watch out for here in the future, aside from all the good work that's being done, particularly by the co-ops to, help facilitate even fiber optic cable lines, I think you're going to see in the not too distant future some advances in satellite internet technology. We've received word already that Tesla and their Starlink program is reaching out to citizens here in Pennsylvania to beta test their system. And based upon their last speed tests that were published, you could get download speeds around 70 megabits per second and upload speeds in excess of 10 megabits per second. So not nearly as good as some cable or fiber optic lines, certainly, but it's certainly one option for areas that have absolutely no other types of connectivity. And I think that that's going to be on the horizon here before long. So I'll stop there. And again, I want to emphasize that if anyone has any questions or we can be a partner for community planning or development in any way, please feel free to reach out to us. That's one of the main reasons why we're here. And I'd be happy to take any questions that folks might have.
Dr. Kopko, there were two questions. One you already answered. That was that you were going to be putting, giving the slides to Caroline. There was another question. Do you work with Pew on research?
We have not worked with Pew yet on broadband internet research. We recently had a hearing where we work with them on COVID vaccinations, but we haven't reached out to them quite yet. So that's on our to-do list among many other community partners and research agencies to help promote broadband access.
Great. And I think Ralph answered the other question in his chat. Caroline?
Dr. Kopko, thank you again so much for your time and for sharing your expertise with the group. I will get those slides out to everyone in a follow-up email after this summit. We'll move on now to our community panel, which is comprised of leaders in our community who represent various industries in and around Adams County. Each panelist will describe why broadband matters to them to help us better understand the depth of impact. Our first panelist is Dr. Wesley Dahl, who is the superintendent of Upper Adams School District, and he's representing the perspective of education. Dr. Wesley Dahl, go right ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My name is Wesley Dahl. I'm the superintendent at the Upper Adams School District in Biglerville, Pennsylvania. We have a school district of between 1,660 to 1,700 students, kindergarten through grade 12. We're about 100 square miles in Adams County. We have Biglerville Elementary School, which is a K through 3 building. This past spring with the COVID pandemic, we did purchase and distribute iPads to all of our students. So those were purchased. That building is about 425 students. Our intermediate school, the Upper Adams Intermediate School, is grades 4 through 6. We utilized 2012 MacBook Pros at that building. Those are laptop devices that were purchased a number of years ago at the high school secondary campus, and then we recycled them and worked them down into the younger grade levels. We have the Upper Adams Middle School, which is grades 7 through 8. They utilize laptop devices. Currently, they're using MacBook Airs, and we have about 275 students there at the middle school. And at the high school, grades 9 through 12, we utilize laptop devices, MacBook Airs. We have over 500 students at our high school. I don't consider myself an expert with technology, but it is critical to education. I'm speaking as one voice of, there are 5 other voices as superintendents in Adams County. So I'll share my perspective. We have recently surveyed our parents, and a lot of the data that was shared prior to my presentation sounds like it's right on the mark with some of the information that we have gathered as well. In 2019, we did a survey of our students and parents, and we had about 80% response rate on that survey. Most of the responses we're getting are people have access to basic as the highest access, high-speed internet, dial-up, and some have no access whatsoever to the internet. During the pandemic, our Cantor funds did purchase or helped to purchase about 200 T-Mobile devices to be utilized as hotspots, but even going to that extent, we've had limited access for certain students. We did provide the importance of equity and trying to reach all students. So that's why we're looking at a K through 12 approach to this so that all students have access to some type of device. We do realize that in the future, technology is highly important in all areas. And in Adams County, this conversation has happened for over 11 years. I believe it started back in 2010 with Adams County Connected. So we're still talking about it. We're still trying to get information out there to the people that need to hear it, and hopefully hear our voices and get internet access that is affordable to all of our residents in Adams County. I too am a resident of Adams County, and there is limited capability of internet depending on where you live. And some of the roadblocks that I believe we may encounter are the idea of population density. When you're looking at population density and where people are living, there's a low profit margin for any of the companies that may be interested in investing in infrastructure. So that is a definite hurdle that we're going to be faced as we look at this throughout our county. If you look at some of the FCC maps, the interesting data that comes from those is that there are no bidders for certain areas throughout Adams County. So that too plays in part with the possibility of the concern with the profit margin return and how long it would take to get information or the money paying off as a result of the infrastructure. There have been a number of cell towers that have been implemented within our community, but I'm not sure at this point what flexibility that would provide. I don't know the impacts or solutions that they would provide. That might be something worth investigating. But the most critical part, and the thing I want everybody to take away from this, is our students need to have access to internet. All of our textbooks, all the resources that are coming out now include some type of internet connectivity or the use of it. And when we are looking at purchasing textbooks, along with that comes the internet connectivity that is needed to access certain resources. So we are limiting what we can provide students as far as experiences. And I'm hopeful a conversation today will lead us into greater access of internet connectivity throughout Adams County. Thank you.
Dr. Dahl, thank you so much for your time today. We'll move on now to Bob Messner, who is the Vice President of Information Technology and is the Chief Information Officer at Harrisburg Area Community College, who will also be representing the perspective of education. Bob, go ahead.
Thank you, Caroline. And I want to echo some of what Dr. Dahl just talked about, because access to the internet is critical for colleges and the communities they serve. We rely on the availability of internet service across the 11 counties that HAC serves, including Adams County, home of our Gettysburg campus. When the pandemic hit, we needed access to high-speed internet, and it was exacerbated. We were required to transition nearly 17,000 students to remote instruction. Recognizing the need to provide students access to internet, HAC procured hotspots through mobile providers. Today, we have 400 hotspots available to our students who have no or limited access to broadband internet service. Many communities HAC serves throughout central Pennsylvania are in desperate need of reliable broadband internet service. As we turn to internet service providers, we employ them to expand their network coverages, and we are encouraged by some of the advancements in data service, such as the promising advancements being made in 5G wireless data service. This service is able to bridge the gaps in rural areas where mobile or cell towers exist, but they only support voice or 3G data services. However, this promising advancement is being met with at least 3 of the following challenges. First, the challenge of the provider's ability to build out their network and retrofit towers with new equipment, which at this time is being focused mostly on the most populous areas. Secondly, once access to internet is addressed, consumers such as our students will experience data limits that carriers such as Comcast are imposing on its customers, impacting affordability. While DirecTV and Dish networks, which are satellite providers, have long provided internet service to rural areas, they impose these same limits on usage, which significantly inhibits our users' online consumption of data. And their service and equipment fees are extremely expensive. Conversely, while mobile providers have had data limits for quite some time, we are now moving toward, many of them are moving towards unlimited internet service plans. With the recent merger of Sprint and T-Mobile, they now offer unlimited data plans, which are competing with Verizon's unlimited data plans. Our third challenge is really, how does the county or the state motivate large internet service providers to support broadband or 5G in rural areas? Rural areas like Adams County face not only a growing dependency on internet service, it also needs to offer options in providers of broadband internet services and wireless mobile providers to ensure their services will meet the ever-changing needs and the growth in our communities in which we serve. Therefore, it's my opinion that 5G wireless networks may be one of the solutions needed for Adams and York counties, where physical topology seems to be difficult in running fiber optic lines. I suggest that we engage our state government to establish incentives for internet providers to build out their services in the rural areas we serve. Thank you.
Bob, thank you so much for your time today and for sharing your insight about the impact of broadband in education. Representing the perspective of healthcare, we have Mick Murphy, who is the Vice President and Chief Technology Officer of WellSpan Health. Mick, whenever you're ready.
Thank you. First, I just want to say thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with everyone today. It's a real pleasure to be here, and it's been a really interesting presentation thus far. One of the things I thought talk about healthcare, but also as an employer, some of the roadblocks that we've experienced around broadband access in the county. We've had some challenges finding broadband for all of our staff. So we, with the onset of the pandemic, we sent a lot of people home where possible, a lot of administrative roles. And work from home has been fantastic for many, but it's been a real challenge for those that don't have that broadband access. Further, from a medical perspective, thinking about on-call access for medical specialists, so thinking about radiologists, neonatologists, obstetricians, it really influences where they can live. A woman in labor, that could last a while, unfortunately, for some. And an obstetrician is able to monitor that safely from home. But that's only possible when broadband is available at home. Finally, from a benefit perspective, if we got to a better availability of broadband access, I think we could see improvements in the local economy, the opportunities for employment. The pandemic has made it possible to work for major national employers from anywhere in the country. So you are hearing about people leaving Google and moving to Chattanooga. So moving from the Bay Area to Chattanooga, why would they move to Chattanooga? Well, Chattanooga has a ubiquitous fiber network that they put in place that enables people to work from that spot and support Google, Square, and get engaged in high-paying, interesting work. From an education perspective, there are tremendous opportunities to learn new skills and develop interests. But all of those things are relying on broadband networking. And finally, from a mental health perspective, social connection is so important to us. And if you think about how difficult that is in the pandemic, but being able to do what we're doing today and reach out and see people and connect with folks, a video visit with friends and loved ones, or if you have the misfortune of someone being in one of our hospitals, being able to reach out and have that video contact with them, as we had to really limit visitation during the pandemic. Finally, from a purely medical perspective, we can really enhance productivity in the community through medical well visits So making that convenient for folks that they don't have to leave their job to come to see us for a well visit, that's convenient, it's time saving. And then for the less well, when you think about acute patients, giving them the ability to stay out of the hospital, they can be comfortable at home. If we have home monitoring and visits available that way, we can keep people in their home or get them home from the hospital sooner because people heal better at home. And if you think about also just the more rural areas, saving people that strain of travel, because sometimes it's an effort to come to see us. So those are some of the contact points that we see from the healthcare perspective.
Mick, thank you so much for sharing that important information and your insights. Next, we will move on to Mark Worley, who is the Director of Operations at Community Media of South Central Pennsylvania. He will share with us his insight and experience in working to bring broadband to Adams County and why it's so important for our community. Mark, go ahead.
Thanks, Caroline. Just wanted to start by saying thanks for everything you do and what SCAP does for our community. Really important work. So Community Media, for those who aren't aware, we're a nonprofit. We've been around for about 35 years now. We manage the area PEG station, that's public education and government. So that's our focus for media. We broadcast to about 40,000 households in the Adams and Hanover area. We also live stream our signal 24/7 on our website and Amazon Fire TV and Roku, and hopefully coming soon to Apple TV. So a few years ago, our board of directors, we went through some changes in our organization, and our board of directors was looking for ways we can continue to help the community. So broadband was one of those things we wanted to focus on. And since we do some live streaming in the community, we sometimes have to create wireless bridges. So we were familiar with fixed wireless technology and the equipment that it takes to do that. So our original plan was to try to start small and do some fixed wireless stuff in the community. So we formed a steering committee, and we wrote a grant to the Adams County Community Foundation. And thanks to them and their foresight for this important work in the community, we received a grant from them and also one from the USDA Rural Business Development Fund. And after we met with our steering committee and did more research, they pointed us to some engineering firms, and through our research, we found if we really want to create a long-term robust system in the community, it's really got to be a fiber system. So working with those engineering firms, we recently completed a feasibility study, which will pass about 1,000 homes in the Abbottstown, New Oxford area and along the Route 30 corridor with fiber access. And that'll be gigabit service expandable to 10 gigabit service. Part of the planning when we were talking about how we wanted to do this was years ago when some of the municipalities were trying to figure out ways to help fund the local volunteer fire departments. And we got the idea of having our points of presence, which is basically just the stuff you need to make the network work, housing those in our local fire department. So we reached out to United Hook and Ladder, and we have had a couple conversations with them, and they're excited about the possibility of this and having it be a revenue generator for them. And as we hopefully execute this project and expand out to the community, hopefully we can reach other organizations and do the same thing with them and create, revenue generators for the community. The great thing I think about this is it's a local project, and it'll benefit not only community media, but the fire departments we may be able to work with. And we have some ideas of how this might be able to also benefit some of the other media outlets in our area to help support them. The money stays local, and that's a great thing. We're prepared to be the ISP, the internet service provider, after we lay the lines. just out of necessity if need be, but we're really looking at this long-term to be accessible to third parties. So hopefully other companies will move into the area and be able to provide access over these lines, creating some competition in the area and driving down costs. Some of the challenges we've seen for this project so far basically has been COVID has just slowed things down for this project. As an organization, we've been doing a lot more in the past year to help local organizations through COVID, and but we're starting to pick back up and hopefully getting close to getting this project funded. Some of the other challenges has been the federal grants. As was noted earlier, the definition of broadband is 25.3 for the federal government, but so if anybody in your planned service area has that, then really you're ineligible for some of these grants. So we're trying to find ways to work around that, and so hopefully to get this rolling. I should note that it sounds like a large hill to climb when you're talking about implementing a new telecom service, but really this is the type of thing that's happening all over small town America, that local communities are taking upon themselves to implement their own networks because the large ISPs just don't see the return revenue generated from implementing new infrastructure. Of course, we all know the importance of really good broadband access, but one thing that hasn't been mentioned so far, I think, is agriculture. And from everything we've kind of researched, big farms are really looking to automate their processes, over the next decade, and hopefully we'll have the technology here to help our local farms keep up with that pace. To close out, if anybody out there is interested in joining us, please reach out and give us a holler. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mark, for sharing your experience with us. Always sure to also get people connected with you if I hear of anyone who might be interested.
Thank you.
Sure. Next, we have Dr. Sherry Walsh of 3P Ride Rabbit Transit, who will share with us why broadband is so important to the transportation industry. Dr. Walsh, go ahead.
Thank you. So I guess to start off, really, when we think about the challenges within our service area, so we do offer transportation within a 10-county region, and a lion's share of our service area is rural. So that being said, we know just from talking to clients that the cost of personal internet connection in people's homes is very costly. And so for some folks, that's just not feasible. Additionally, we have seen that there is a reluctance to embrace technology. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that they're not exposed to it in their own personal bubble. And so if we can expand the accessibility to that, I think we can really start to help individuals embrace technology. And it's also been mentioned already, but there is a lack of access to devices, just the affordability of those devices. So in some of our conversations and research that we've done within our service area, we know that about 51% of the people that use our service have a smartphone. About 74% have a computer or laptop within their location. So that leaves 26% of people that really could benefit from increased accessibility to devices, and obviously then the access to broadband. So from an employment perspective, when the pandemic hit, we transitioned a lot of our folks to working from home. And as an employer of about 600 staff, obviously a bulk of those employees are folks that are on the buses. So their office is rolling throughout the communities. But the others of us, including myself, it was really a matter of transitioning to working from home. And so fortunately for myself, I have the access, but many don't. So there were certainly some challenges associated with that. So from a transportation perspective, having better access to broadband increases the accessibility to our services. So for us, increased broadband equals increased accessibility to real-time passenger information for fixed route services via MyStop. And then it also, for most of our paratransit riders, really are most vulnerable. I know that folks have referenced seniors and persons with disabilities. So by increasing broadband, we increase their access to Find My Ride, which allows folks to book their own trips, cancel trips, and also, again, receive that real-time information. And the bigger part of that is really about the independence that that provides. So instead of someone having to reach out and sit on a phone call on hold, waiting for someone to be available to speak to them, it really increases their independence and allows them to really take control of their own transportation by creating their trips and all those things that I just mentioned. And again, along with that, there's a self-sufficiency component of that, where we, in speaking with our riders, we know that that's something that folks really want. Especially, we have noticed, and maybe I'm speaking out of turn, but we've noticed that with our folks that have disabilities, that's really one of the things that they strive for from an interpersonal perspective. So currently, cell phone coverage is a challenge in more rural areas. And so having increased broadband allows them to at least have one means of being connected. So, and one thing that I find very interesting is through the course of all the work, I've been in transportation for 13 years. And through the course of that, you know, I've often heard about, and, you know, residents and clients saying, you know, we feel isolated when we don't have that opportunity to just get out, where folks take for granted the fact that they have personal transportation. But I think the reality is now that the pandemic has hit, we really, those of us who have access and can hop in our cars and go, this pandemic really gave us the opportunity to experience what our riders often experience, and that's the social isolation and kind of feeling trapped. And so when we have those things, it really, and this far supersedes transportation, but in general, we all kind of know what that feels like. And so I feel like, you know, the pandemic, for all the negatives it brought, I think that it brought some positives by bringing to light how important maintaining that accessibility and engagement in our communities. So again, I think from transportation perspective, it's really about giving folks independence and self-sufficiency and the access to all of those things that can aid in that. Thank you.
Dr. Walsh, that's so important. Thank you so much for sharing your time and insight with us today. Our last panelist is Robin Fitzpatrick, President of Adams Economic Alliance, excuse me. She represents the perspectives of business and agriculture, and she'll share with us some of the benefits of broadband access to these industries. So Robin, go ahead. Robin, you're muted. I'm sorry.
I'm so sorry. A glitch right from the start. I apologize.
All right. Go ahead.
Well, I had to be muted because the folks taking care of snow removal were here just moments ago, and you could hear the beeping, the metal on the concrete, and I thought, this is Murphy's Law or just really bad karma. So they are gone now. I have indeed chosen to talk about business and industry today and focus on two specific ones. The first one is manufacturing, and that is because, number one, it employs a lot of people in Adams County, but also because of the livable wages that it offers folks. And the second one is agriculture, and Mark alluded to that early on, and I thought, oh, is he going to take my spiel? But it was a perfect segue, so I thank you, Mark. So let's just take a few of our local industrial businesses as our examples. Say Plastics is a plastic thermoforming manufacturer, and Precision Cut Industries uses lasers to precision cut, bend, and weld metal. These manufacturers are on the southeastern side of the county, and they rely heavily upon very large data files like engineer drawings to communicate with the computer operated machines. Without that uninterrupted access or slow access, that really creates a lag in the process. Oftentimes meaning downtime for the employees. And that's just not a good long-term solution for processing, particularly if you're working in lean processing. There's also an ability to program and reprogram computers remotely. And the one thing that, one thing among many that COVID highlighted for us was our local shortcomings, as this level of work was not accessible from remote places. People had to go on site, even if their business was not deemed for whatever period of time to be life-sustaining. So there was a real disconnect there. Remote diagnostics for maintenance and assembly is now very common. Why wait for something to break in your processing line and then the time it takes to repair, and again, the employee downtime, which is very expensive for them to not be doing what they're meant to do. When you can monitor this, but this too requires very high-speed internet. The thing I am anxious also to talk about is the ag industry. And Bob Messner said something about the different internet services. People would often think, well, what does ag have to do? Why do they need access to high-speed broadband? Well, GPS is becoming the standard in this industry for every type of farming equipment. Every machine that leaves the factory, and I'm getting this data from local manufacturers. I spoke with GVM about this in Biglerville, and they said that every machine that leaves their factory has auto steering technology that requires GPS. Other machines like tractors, planters, combines, windrowers, all have this technology as well. And on top of that, telematics is really growing in the ag market. So to Mark's comment, you know, some of these machines drive on their own with GPS. There's an ag processor in the northern part of the county that ships a great deal of product, and based upon where they are in the driveway, the trucks either have or don't have cell phone service. So when they're ready for the truck to pull up and get what they're supposed to get, if they have the right cell service, they get the message. If they don't, somebody has to run out, and based upon where they are in the queue, they have to tell them that they're up next. And I talked to many farmers who carry 2 cell phones with them just so they can be accessible at all times. So with that, you know, in order for us to retain our businesses, help them grow, and even attract new ones, this is critical. Thank you.
Robin. Thank you for your time and for representing two industries to help us better understand the impact of broadband in our county in diverse ways. That concludes our community panel. I'd like to reiterate that if you have any thoughts, comments, or questions, please put them in the chat box. We may not have much time to get to them today, but I will do my best to get back to everyone about those questions and get the information to you that we need. Our panelists and our speakers are willing to share their contact information as well, so I'll follow up in an email with that for all of you at the end of our summit. Next, we have Adams County Commissioner Marty Qualley, who will describe the importance of broadband access for Adams County and express the commitment of the Adams County Commissioners to this critical development. Take it away, Commissioner Qualley.
Well, I was going to start off with a joke about my dogs being really quiet, and then one of them just woke up. So let's hope that she's good for a little bit. So thank you everyone for being interested in this topic. It wasn't too long ago that we weren't even really talking about this. So it's to your credit that you want to learn more. And thank you At Home in Adams County for getting this great group together. I like to think that I can absorb a lot of information quickly. I'm having a hard time keeping up with all of this. So that is a great sign that you've put together a good group of panelists. So I think today's format really highlights where we are when it comes to the importance of the internet. If it was normal here, we'd all be over at HAC. But this little short 3-hour snowstorm probably would have canceled this summit. So it's important that we all have access so we can continue our jobs, our everything. So today, for example, I'm relegated down to the kitchen because my wife is using our office upstairs to do a Microsoft Teams meeting with staff she works with in Georgia, the country Georgia, not the state. So this is something that we're all getting used to doing on a regular basis. So I want to focus on one of the challenges we have right now. Is it's actually a twofold challenge. We're having to educate the public on the need for high-speed internet access, but we also have to spend some time, and others have mentioned this, educating the internet service providers. It is in their long-term self-interest to change their business model and start coming into rural Adams County and deploying either more, wide fiber or fixed wireless, as Mark had mentioned. And to be frank, at this point, we've heard about Starlink coming into the area. If our local providers aren't willing to improve, there are other providers out there who are. And in my position, I'll work with anybody so long as this helps what we're all doing. Because honestly, our students, to Dr. Dole's point, our employees, to Robin's point, and all of our residents, we can't afford to be left behind anymore. And I think we've seen that we have been left behind in some regards. So let me relate to you my first community experience in the limited broadband capacity we have in Adams County. If all you remember, a few years ago, we had the 150th commemoration of the Battle of Gettysburg. Well, prior to that commemoration, there were a lot of community meetings to discuss how we were going to organize and our infrastructure challenges. Now, keep in mind, the infrastructure challenges we were talking about back then, were, do we have enough hotel rooms? Traffic control, were we going to have traffic jams throughout the county? Public transportation, we even had discussions about porta-johns. That was the infrastructure we were talking about. Meanwhile, Stacy Fox and I are sitting there in a meeting and we hold up our cell phones and go, these weren't invented at the last anniversary. Do we actually have the infrastructure to deal with this? And one of your participants is currently texting me. So Sherry, pay more attention, would you? And so as leaders in the community, the commissioners, we're sitting there and one of the questions, this is a bit of language that maybe all of you don't appreciate, but when you're sitting behind a desk and someone presents to you a problem and you don't have the solution, it is called an oh shit moment. Oh shit, this isn't going to end. The 150th is coming, but we're not ready for it. So we actually contacted all the local telecommunication companies and said, what do we do? What's the problem? And what they told us pretty quickly was, to Dr. Kopko's point, we're very rural here. But for the 150th, we became very urban very fast. And when everyone would show up, if people were going to send videos to their friends or post pictures on Facebook, or journalists get involved, our cell towers, there would have been too much data and it simply would have overwhelmed them and they would have shut off. We would have just been producing static to showcase Gettysburg. So fast forward to today. We already know that our students need it all the time. A lot of us, not all of us, we have multiple devices at our homes that are connected to the internet. My furnace is connected, our TVs, our gaming systems, lots and lots of more things. On the community level, we have buses we've seen are now connected. We shop online. One of my dogs wants some attention right now. She's not very connected to the internet, but we buy all of her food online and have it delivered to our house. Today, I am picking up groceries at the grocery store that we pre-ordered. We have had them shipped to our house. These are things that we need to deal with today. Now let's skip forward a little bit. Imagine if we had workers here, not just attracting workers from other places to come here, but imagine if our workers who are living here now could be doing what my wife is doing, could be trained to be working in a remote setting so that they're living here, spending their money here, but they're working in San Francisco or Europe or DC. That would be great for our community. So anyhow, I could go on about this for quite a while, but I've already been given my 1 minute signal. So I want to help introduce some of our neighbors just next door who are sort of on the cutting edge for South Central PA to bring our infrastructure to where it needs to be. We have Julie Wheeler, one of the county commissioners, a rookie county commissioner who has been very impressive in the meetings we've met with. If you try to blow smoke at her or get kind of think you're not going to give her the details, you're not going to get very far. So I know she is riding herd on this project. Also with the vice president of the York County Economic Alliance, Dr. Silas Chamberlain. What they are doing is they are looking to leverage county resources, county assets, and a vision from their community to improve the broadband network in rural York County. We need to be looking at this because, to Mark's point, there are a lot of places where there are voids. And if the local community doesn't pick up the slack, we're not going to have access. So thank you both for joining us, and I will turn it over to you. We're back to Carolyn.
Great. Thank you so much, Commissioner Qualley. And he's right. I am a bit of a data junkie. So I really believe in getting the data, talking to subject matter experts, and also listening. I think we learn a lot by listening. And I'll echo a little bit what the commissioner said regarding his wife's role. I spent 30 years in corporate America, most of that working for General Electric. And before I left General Electric and decided to run for office, I ran a $300 million medical device business from my home here in York County. So it's been a way of life for me, being able to work remotely. And I think it's key if we want to continue to drive economic development in our communities that we have this capability out there. So Silas and I are going to tag team today. So I'm up first. We're going to give you a little bit of background on what we've been doing here in York County, and I'm really excited about it. We've made, I would say, a baby step forward, lots more steps to make. But if there's one thing I could leave you guys with is that you got to start somewhere. These are big projects, but you have to start making a plan and start tackling it. So with that, Silas, if we could. So last year, last April, the commissioners got together. This was prior to us realizing we were going to have CARES funding from the federal government. We got together and commissioned a task force, which I'm pleased to share with you. Silas also led that task force to take a look at how do we come out of this pandemic from an economic standpoint. And one of the overarching themes that came back in that report, we had roughly 30 to 40 subject matter experts in our community that participated in that. But each one of the focus areas, what they brought back was the need to improve the connectivity technology in York County. That was something that was consistent across the board. You know, we've, you know, Mick spoke to it a little bit. We've seen a lot of trends around telehealth that are going on out there. In addition, you know, to add to what Dr. Dahl said around remote education. For those of you, last week, the Central Penn Business Journal shared some data that Highmark has seen a 3,400% increase in telehealth services. So this is the future, and we have to be a part of it so that our residents can be a part of it. In early August of last year, the commissioners looked at our CARES funding allocations, and given what came out of the Recovery Strong Task Force report, we really felt it was important to allocate some of our CARES funding to broadband. So what we did is we approved a broadband feasibility study, which we're going to talk a little bit about later in the presentation, to really take a look at what is needed in York County from a holistic perspective. You know, I think you talk to residents in Red Lion and Brogue, and you talk to Dr. Van Dusen, who's the superintendent in the Southeastern School District, and everyone clearly states that, hey, we've got some problems. So, but we never really had a holistic view of what was needed in York County. So part of the feasibility study that was commissioned was to take a look at that. In addition, we had a supplement to the feasibility study that took a look at what federal and state grants are out there. Knowing that our CARES funding went away at the end of last year, we wanted to make sure we identified potential funding streams for the future so that we could continue the work that we've started. Fast forward to mid-October, the commissioners approved $1.5 million in CARES funding to construct a pilot project. Again, we're going to talk a little bit about that in later in the presentation. But really investing in infrastructure and establishing a backbone that we could build off of for future expansion. And then the other thing that the commissioners did with CARES funding is we allocated a little over $1 million to all of our public and private schools, as well as the York County Library System to help address short-term connectivity needs. So I really think we were prudent and strategic in investing some of those CARES funding dollars to help our community with broadband technology. In addition, I also wanted to mention that in addition to the Recovery Strong Task Force report, both our county's economic action plan and our updated county comprehensive plan both identified the need to have an increase in connectivity technology out in our community. So both of those plans were approved by the Board of Commissioners at the end of last year. So Silas, if you could jump.
Yep.
I think, I apologize, it might have been Dr. Dahl that mentioned this, or maybe Kyle at the beginning. So here's a picture of the FCC mapping for York County. So if you look at this, one would go, oh, well, it looks like York County doesn't have any connectivity needs. And again, for those of us who live in the Red Line and Brogue area, we know that's not the case. So the feasibility study that we did also allowed us to really have some documentation on what's needed. One of the next steps that we'll talk about later in the slide is the demand aggregation study that the county is going to be looking to do. So if you look at this, then you look at the census mapping, right? The census mapping tells a bit of a different picture. So we certainly recognize that the data is somewhat valuable from the SEC, but really doesn't give a full picture of what's going on here in York County. And that's a higher level view of actually York City there, the census mapping for you. So with that, I'm going to segue over to my friend Silas, and he's going to talk a little bit about the pilot project that we did and who we worked with, and then I'll kind of wrap up the end with where we go from here.
Great, thanks, Julie, and thanks everybody for having us. And I'll just say before I jump into the description here that you guys, the conversation today has been great. It's a lot of things that we've been talking about in York County, and it seems like you have a really great handle on what the needs are and what some of the opportunities are. And it's been good to see what other counties are doing, even as we've been working very specifically here in York. So as Julie mentioned, we really started from a data focus, and we recognized that we didn't have a lot of strengths in broadband. In fact, I think it's something somebody said a little earlier, we hadn't even been talking about up until really recently. We knew it was a need, but we hadn't really gotten serious about it. So engaging with two partners very early on was important. We have worked with Catapult Engineering, which is based in Dillsburg, right in Northern York County. They just happen to be experts on utilities and how to work with MedEd and PPL and others that can help expand a broadband network or any kind of utility. And then Lit Communities is a national partner that's based in Alabama with staff around the country that helps cities and counties and regions figure out how to do community broadband networks. So we've been working with both of them throughout. And during our first meeting with them, where we started to talk about the feasibility study that Julie mentioned, they actually suggested to us, hey, the study is going to be great, but you could probably get some fiber in the ground now before your CARES Act funds run out. So that was, it turned out to be a great idea, but also one that meant we would spend 4 months working really hard to try to find a corridor that made sense and get fiber into the ground, which we were successful in doing. And this is what our pilot project was. Up on the northern part is the city of York, which is obviously our largest community. And then the corridor for the broadband travels southward through a number of small communities, Seven Valleys, Glen Rock, Railroad, New Freedom, to the border with Maryland. The reason we chose this corridor is because this is our heritage rail trail. It's a county park. And 20 years ago, someone had the foresight when they were doing construction on the trail and putting in some conduit for MCI, which became Verizon, to put in an empty conduit that's now been sitting there for 20 years underground. And in trying to meet the criteria of the CARES Act and move very quickly, we identified that corridor early on as one of our only opportunities. So we were actually able to proof that conduit, add a bunch of what are called handholds, which are really vaults at key intersections where future connections can be made off the trail, and then pull through that existing conduit. And then again, to meet the CARES Act goals, we put a wireless antenna right around the middle. And this is temporary. If you went there now, you would sort of be shocked at how small it is, but it can actually cover square mile with wireless coverage. But the real goal here is not to provide that short-term wireless coverage, but to create a backbone that can then be connected into other parts of the county. And as you'll see in a moment, this is a really critical corridor that'll become part of what we envision to be 7 rings throughout York County. So again, why did we pick a corridor like this? Not only because the conduit was already there, but because we knew design, permitting, and construction are the things that would slow us down. As any of you have worked to try to look at aerial connections for broadband, you know that the make ready work on existing poles is one of the more expensive pieces of this. So we were able to go underground with it and cut back on a lot of costs. But we also looked at it as being centrally located, and our planning commission was able to show us that even just if you took a 1 mile buffer on either side of the trail, that we were reaching 25% of all the businesses in York County just with this 16-mile segment. So it's very strategic from that perspective as well. Again, this is a dark fiber project, so it's not like we're connecting to every household or business along this route. It is supposed to be the backbone for additional connections out into the community. So that's where we have been walking this balance between trying to do enough to incentivize private investment, but then allowing the private market to come in and build off of it. So that's where we are right now with the pilot project. It's in place, the fiber is lit, but it's a matter of now enticing that private investment into some of these regions. So just to be totally candid, we spent when it was all said and done, about $1.5 million on the pilot project. We also did some projections on revenue that if we leased just to a couple of the major businesses along the route, we could generate about $40,000 a year. Because the conduit is buried, the only real cost that you have for it is the actual light that you're providing and the service itself, which you lease from another provider. The whole reason that we did this was just to show the county that fiber is not this sort of suck on capital and operational costs. It actually, even in its most passive level, can generate some leases for fiber that actually make it revenue positive. And so it does have the potential to drive revenue. On the really passive side, a very small amount of revenue that really covers your costs and allows you to do the mission work. But on the more active side of it could be a major driver of revenue. So we did the pilot project, and that was sort of a separate thing that was self-contained. And then we also did this countywide feasibility study, which really by the end of it looked more like a business plan. It didn't spend a whole lot of time talking about why you should do this. We sort of took it as granted that everybody understood the why part of it and just started talking about the how. So LIT, our partner, looked at data that we provided from our planning commission about priority institutions countywide. So that was things like school districts, every school in the county, EMS places, ambulance companies, key infrastructure like wastewater treatment plants and public drinking water. And as the team built out this proposed network that I'll show you in a second, they were trying to link as many of those assets together as possible to get them as close to the broadband rings as you could. So the most important part of the assessment was this preliminary design of a countywide middle mile network. And I'll show you what this looks like in a moment, but if you think of a middle mile network sort of as the highway system for fiber, and then the fiber to the home or the last mile network as all the small things that come off of the highway that actually connect to homes and businesses, our focus was more so on this middle mile. We use a lot of software in doing this analysis, and that's really where having a consultant that's familiar with it helps. But Catapult Engineering also went out in the field and analyzed 107,000 poles. So pretty much every pole in York County that we could use for aerial connections was analyzed. And then in our financial models, which was another big piece of the plan, we were able to take a realistic look at the difference, or really the ratio between going underground and going aerial, what the implications were for costs, future maintenance, operations, and things like that. So we tried to drill as far down past the conceptual to the real conditions on the ground when we were doing our modeling. And then Julie also mentioned the grant services, which we felt were really important to have as part of this, so that we didn't just finish this plan with CARES Act funding and then hit 2021 and sort of hit a wall. The grant services piece of it really tries to give us a path forward in getting some funding for this. So this is out of 70 pages in our report, probably the most important one. This is our middle mile network that now is sort of the driving vision for what broadband looks like in York County. It's based on 7 rings. Each one of them roughly serves the same amount of homes and businesses. So you can see in some of our more urban areas, the rings are tighter and a little bit smaller. And then in some of our more rural areas, they're much larger. Each of the rings is varies in cost, and I'll show you some examples of that, but it's not an inexpensive undertaking, as you can imagine. But the whole point of this is to get dark fiber, the backbone, out into places of the county that don't have access now. So when Julie showed that census mapping a moment ago that showed 75% of households in southeastern York County don't have access, that was really the rings over here. This is that community. And when she showed some of the areas that have, more than 50% without access, that was parts of this. So by getting this out here into the communities, the whole idea is that it lowers that initial barrier for private providers to come into a region. And it sort of takes away that excuse, or at least makes the numbers work a little better when a private provider is saying it doesn't make monetary sense, we can't get enough revenue out of this. You are taking down the first barrier, which is providing the dark fiber to a part of the county. So within that 7 rings, we've identified 3 as ones that we're prioritizing. Rings 4, 5, and 6, which are our most underserved part of the counties right now. But it's also important that they converge back up towards the city of York, which you saw in the census mapping is also underserved despite being our most urban area in the county. And the other important thing here is that this line right here between ring 5 and ring 6 is our pilot project. So we've already built a significant portion of this ring with our CARES Act funding. And so now it's just a matter of continuing to branch off of it into this part of the county for ring 5, this part of the county for ring 6, and continue to build off of the momentum that we've already achieved. But here's the real costs. If you're looking at building all 3 of these rings, that's a $20 million undertaking. And you can see that some of the rings are a little more expensive at closer to 7 million or over 7 million. You can see some that are a little more or roughly half that. But the whole point is that $20 million sounds like a big number, but when we're talking about the critical need around broadband, it really isn't a huge number. And it does give you a path forward that seems a little more achievable when you start to look at some of the federal and state funding that's available, even some of the private investment that's out there. The expenses for building the entire middle mile network are estimated to be about $42 million, closer to $43 million. And you can see that after it's built, there are recurring expenses. So you're paying to be the ISP or to pay an ISP for the internet service itself, the operating and maintenance of a network like that, especially with the aerial connections. You know, if a car drives into a pole, you're responsible for building that back up. But the potential revenues are very significant. And this is a more passive model where the county itself just leases the fiber and then works with a private provider to do fiber to the home, could still generate upwards of $2 million a year in revenue, which more than outweighs the cost of actually running the network and maintaining the network. There are certainly models, which I think Julie has that slide coming up, where the county can work with a partner who's much more active or can be that partner themselves, and the revenues are in the tens of millions of dollars. Of course, that's a different model than what county government is normally undertaking. And so we've talked to a lot of different places where this is working and where it isn't to try to figure out what's right for York County. And we think it'll be a balance between the two and a real focus on the middle mile rather than the fiber to the home. So Julie, is this where you're taking over for me again?
I think so, but you're doing a great job. As Silas touched on, we need to continue to move forward and be aggressive about moving forward and capitalize on the work that's been done thus far. So we are looking at both federal and state grants. There's certainly a little more available from the federal standpoint out there for projects like this. There's a whole list of acronyms up there, and I won't embarrass myself because I don't think I know what all of those stand for. The other thing that we're looking at, York County's been blessed. We have a very good philanthropic community here, and certainly looking to our local community, but also there are national philanthropic foundations that are looking to invest in projects like this. I do think the great thing for York County, when we look at this strategically, because we've made this investment, many of these grants require demonstration that you have the capabilities to do something like this. So we've done that with our pilot project. They also require that the county has some financial stake in the game, which we've also done. As Silas mentioned earlier, we spent a little over $1.5 million in the pilot project. Certainly, we're going to look at other types of financial models and what's out there via bonds and equity investment. And again, where we go next probably will be some sort of public-private partnership. Silas mentioned earlier, there's a couple ownership and operational models that were brought forward in the business plan. One that would be very passive, right? The county just owns the middle mile network and leases the capacity to transition to something middle of the road, and then an active where the county would actually own the middle mile network and provide its own last mile services through some sort of nonprofit or public type corporation. I think the great thing is that we have a choice at the county level. And the great thing is this will not be a drain on our taxpayers. If this is done properly, this will be another revenue generating lever that we can pull. As Commissioner Qualley probably can attest, counties don't have a lot of revenue generators out there, unlike the private sector. So this allows us some flexibility to have something else as a county asset that generates revenue. Next steps, we wanted to share with you, again, we're not stopping, we're going to keep moving forward. I think it's been about a week ago that the commissioners established a York County Fiber Broadband Task Force to oversee the implementation of this report. Much like the Recovery Task Force report that we had, we didn't want it to lay on a shelf and collect dust, right? We spent the time and the money to do this, and now we're going to use it and move things forward. I'm really excited. I think the next slide, when we get to that, I'll show you the list of participants, but we really were intentional and people that we selected to be part of this task force. I know Mick Murphy, who's on here representing WellSpan, is a member of that task force, but from education to healthcare to utilities, both county and municipal government businesses, as well as economic development. So I really feel like we have a good cross-section of folks participating in this task force. I mentioned in my opening remarks when I was showing the FCC chart, another criteria for some of these grants is really to show the need in the community. If you look at the FCC grant map, you would think, well, we don't have a problem in York, but for those that live in York, we know that's not the case. So one of the things that we're getting ready to embark on is a demand aggregation survey in York County to really document where the gaps are. Silas and I are working on raising funding for that, again, so we don't have to spend taxpayer dollars. It's about a $20,000 price tag for that. We are just about halfway through raising half of that money. So I'm really confident that we will be able to raise that money from our philanthropic community to fund that study. Again, we're going to focus on federal and state grants, and in all likelihood, we're going to charter the task force with coming back and prioritizing the rings. But again, based on the chart that Silas showed you, we feel pretty confident that we're going to need to prioritize rings 4, 5, and 6 initially. And there's, just so you can see, that's a cross section of the people on our task force. So we've got county engineers, we've got the superintendents represented, Dr. Van Dusen from Southeastern, both of our large healthcare providers in the community, WellSpan and UPMC, our friends in Hanover, Gary Laird, who is the president and CEO of the Hanover Chamber of Commerce. Again, just a really good cross section of individuals in our community. Couple lessons learned, and Silas, feel free to chime in here as well. I really do. If you want to be successful, you really need someone that's going to be a strong champion at the countywide level. I hope that I wasn't too aggressive, but gently nudging people, encouraging people, motivating people to keep moving forward. You really do need someone that's going to wave the flag and champion this and help people like Silas and others to get the roadblocks out of the way when you run across them. I think the other real important thing for you all is, create a shared vision and make it big and make it compelling. This is something that we can do to help our entire community. We've got a little over 450,000 people here that live in York County. And for us to be able to do something like this that really holistically should help everyone in our community, I think is a great thing. And Mr. Crowley mentioned it earlier, data. I love data. And data is really important so that you can make smart, strategic, and tactical decisions. We all know broadband is very complex. Silas tutors me on the side because I'm not the most tech savvy commissioner out there. But don't be afraid because it is complex. Just don't shy away of that. There are people out there that can walk you through, educate you, and teach you. Besides Silas, he mentioned Catapult and Lit Communications. They've been lockstep with the county on this. And really make sure that when you put your broadband plans in place, that they are countywide, and make sure that they fit with the other types of planning documents that you have in there. There shouldn't be something separate. It should be in addition, right? It should basically be cumulative with those types of plans and policies. And be creative about your partners and your funding and looking at your existing assets. As Silas said, we are blessed here in York County that somebody had the foresight 20 years ago to run that conduit down the rail trail. And I'll use that as an example. I got a lot of pushback in the beginning for the pilot project. Oh, well, you don't know that's going to be in bad shape. And what if this, what if that? And those are all great what ifs, but that did not deter me from pushing forward and moving the project forward. Great thing for us is the conduit was in fantastic shape. So just don't shy away from something like this because it's a big project. And if we have time, we'll take questions, but that's up to Caroline.
Yeah, thanks, Commissioner Wheeler and Silas. I'm really looking forward to using the information that we've learned from you to apply it to our tactics moving forward with this work. what you've shared with us today is invaluable, and I'm glad that you've seen such success in your county with what you're doing here. We are running a little bit ahead of schedule, so we have a few minutes for some brief questions, if anybody does have some. I'll start us off with a question that I see here in the chat. Is this fiber optic backbone connected to UFD?
Yeah, so for anybody that's not from York County, UFD is United Fiber and Data. They're based in York. They've been building a line between really Manhattan and Northern Virginia over the course of the last decade or so, which is dark fiber connected to businesses, and then they lease it out. Our pilot project doesn't link into their project, but their line is part of that countywide network. So they follow mostly the route along Route 30, which cuts like north to west across our county. We are sort of on this north-south with our pilot project. So it's definitely a potential critical piece of it. And that's where that private partnership starts to come in, where if we are building a part of a ring, UFD already has part of a ring. Chantel's another provider in York County that and regionally that also has some fiber built. And there's a couple others. The county even owns some fiber already between their buildings. Trying to piece all that together is a pretty critical piece of it. So we're definitely going to take advantage of anything that's there already and not recreate the wheel or duplicate efforts. But I will say the nice thing about duplicative efforts and the nice thing about a ring model is you'll hear a lot about redundancy when you talk about broadband networks, and the idea if you do something that's linear, that in that line all of a sudden cuts off service. But a ring that provides connection from two different angles, especially when they're all connected back together, becomes a lot more resilient over the long run. So that's another benefit of that ring model that we're looking at.
Okay, great.
Silas, maybe you could talk to, there was a question about, did we get any pushback from people like Comcast, and we didn't. So maybe you could speak to why we didn't get that and why this is actually a good thing for people like Comcast and Verizon.
Yeah, so in theory, Comcast and Verizon are potential providers that would lease capacity from our network. Whether they decide to or not will be up to them. And the nice thing about the county owning the middle mile will be that when we do go out to issue RFPs to service providers, we can put some standards into those, requests. So we can say, we know the shortcomings of our larger providers as well as anybody else. And we can say, if you want access to this, we're not totally motivated by revenue. So it's not just whoever makes the highest bid on capacity. It's who can connect the most households, what are the price points, all those kinds of issues. That's one of the benefits of doing that demand aggregation study that Julie mentioned, and getting some, better local data on what people are paying and what they want to see, because then we can start to bake those things into who we allow to access our middle mile network. And if it's somebody that's going to, maximize profit and only worry about that and not provide the services or the cost points that residents need, then we're not interested. But there's plenty of providers out there that have already reached out. Comcast, Verizon, our local providers have all expressed interest and support and have not stood in the way of it. If we rolled out a full fiber to the home approach and we said we were going to start connecting to households and businesses on a large scale, that's where you would start to get the calls about competing with the private sector. But right now we're trying to walk that fine balance.
That's great. Thank you. We don't seem to have any other questions in the chat, but I'd like to take the time to open up any other questions to the group. We have time for just a few more. So if anyone has a question, please.
Caroline?
Yes.
Caroline, it's Ralph. So, so just watching this transpire over the last couple of years, the Community Foundation did make that grant to community media. Mark, if you want to talk to, that east-west link, Silas, was exactly what we had hoped community media could link onto. And then it seems that UFD imploded on itself after it did what it was supposed to do. So I just want to stress, it wasn't the fact that they put in that secondary line from New York to Virginia. They just couldn't manage it internally. we need a champion. And it's really clear that this fiber optic backbone from York City down to the Maryland line wouldn't happen if not for two things. It seems that Commissioner Wheeler, she's no rookie, but she's the president commissioner. We have two Republicans and a Democratic commissioner in York County. She's the president Republican commissioner. We have on our call today, I'm just going to say it because you can't fire me. We have our one Democratic Adams County commissioner. And being the minority commissioner in this system that we have in PA is like pushing a small snowball up a very hot hill. So who, Adams County, is our champion? Who's going to push this through? This combination of county commissioner and the York Economic Alliance is what's pushing this. Robin Fitzpatrick needs someone to push this. Community media needs someone to push this. Upper Adams and every other school district can piecemeal this all together. I think Westall, raise your hand if you bought out every T-Mobile hotspot. Right? Yeah, you bought hundreds of them. And so we're sitting here thinking about how do we do this together? And I don't know if the hotspots that were created, that were made available through the school districts, could also then bring internet access to that family for medical appointments. So do we try to find a way to do this piecemeal, or do we find a champion that can make it happen? And who is that? And what do we do to make that happen? Julie, who got in your ear? I'm sorry, Commissioner Wheeler, who got in your ear?
You can call me Julie. I don't know. What do you mean? Like what motivated me?
Yeah, like someone had so all this, the sky is falling around our commissioners all the time. There are tugs for money from everywhere. And you have to control that budget. What got your attention? Because we need to do the same thing here.
Yeah, I think it started, right, we had that Recovery Strong Task Force report, and it was so blatantly obvious from that report on how important this was in the community. And also for me, coming from a big global company and running a business from my home, I was used to working remotely, having to do those things. Some of it was a mindset change. I mean, I know in the county when we declared the emergency declaration last year and closed our buildings to the public, it was a transition for people to work remotely because that hadn't been a way to do business here in county government. But it was easy. I mean, it's a problem that's holistic across the community, and it's a problem that doesn't really have political division, right? Whether you're a Republican, a Democrat, a Libertarian, a Green Party, or whatever it's out there, I think we would all parties would agree this is the right thing to do for our community. So I just, as my grandmother would say, got to be in my bonnet and wasn't going to let it stop. And I had a great partner in Silas at the Economic Alliance. So I would agree I needed a partner, and I had a great partner. So we pushed it together.
Thank you, Commissioner Wheeler and Ralph. I think that was really well said and such an important message to sort of round out our event today. A very important call to action to consider, and a great segue into saying that from this summit, we would like to form a broadband task force for Adams County. If anyone here is interested in joining this task force, please use the link in our chat box to sign up. As I said before, I'll send out a follow-up email to the group with this information as well to include any other contact information and resources we discussed here today. Particularly, if anyone knows of or is interested in or sharing some information about how we can best champion this initiative, please watch for the notification, that follow-up email. We plan to have a follow-up meeting to discuss our next steps in a couple of weeks. And by that point, we hope to have a good number of people signed up for that task force. So please don't neglect that opportunity. For any questions that you have, please visit our website, www.homeandadamscounty.org, where you can find the link to general information about broadband and common questions, as well as a question and answers form on our page. We are incredibly motivated by the support that we see here at today's meeting and are grateful to be sharing the space with leaders in our community and in neighboring communities from whom we can learn, collaborate, and create impactful, lasting change in Adams County. The strength in this work is because of you and your support, and I couldn't be more proud to be a part of such an incredible initiative with so many great people. That is all that we have for today and our summit. Before leaving, does anybody have any other questions that they'd like to ask now for the good of the group?
Carolyn, I would just add, if anyone wants to reach out to Silas and I offline, we're certainly more than happy to get into further details if we can help. So
great.
Caroline, there's a question about that foresight of having that conduit installed along the rail trail 10 years ago. What did that save you in terms of not having to do that right now?
Yeah, that saved roughly $4 to $5 million in not having to permit and design and install the conduit. That's why one of the conversations you'll see at a state level when it comes to policy is, should the state or counties be enacting what are called one dig policies, where every time you're putting in a street improvement, every time you're building a trail, you are putting empty conduit underneath it, knowing that, yeah, it's going to cost a little bit more up front, but it's going to save you millions of dollars down the road to have that right of way and that conduit in place. So that's another thing that's in our study and that we're considering what policy changes you could make so that a fluke like that becomes something that's much more common.
Great, thank you. It looks like we have one other question here as well, to ask how much money was saved for this project by having the initial conduit available. And you may have already touched on this, but just to reiterate.
Sorry.
Yeah, that was the $4 to $5 million estimate. Yep.
Yeah, I think there's one more. And what kind of limitations are we imposing on ourselves and our municipalities by entering into agreements with specific providers? I think you did not do that, right? You guys are doing that independently so that later you can have that competition.
That's correct. Yep. We don't have a preferred provider, and we'll probably just achieve that through an RFP process.
And that's one of the reasons you'll look at our task force. We don't have representation on there from those types of companies, and that was done very deliberately.
Okay, that looks like that's all that we have for today. Again, please just keep an eye out for that follow-up email to include details about our follow-up meeting, as well as the link to sign up for the task force if you're interested in participation. I'll include that contact information for all of our participants, speakers, and panelists today for you to reach out with any further questions. And again, thank you everyone so much for joining us today. It was a pleasure to be here. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.